In the war on terror, which is the white nationalists' fault, the old saying was, you know, it for those who are scared of flying, you can't let the terrorists win. You can't let them take our freedoms. But the white nationalists are winning, and the white nationalists are actively taking our freedoms, such as their strategic positions of false dichotomies, which generates their various manipulation of the direct attack on rights itself, and that baseline construct for their extortions and their voter frauds and their coercions, such as William Barr's pre-crime structure, which generates the position of them calculating opposition to the white nationalist insurrections, such as J-secular civil war, which is the coercion against votes, which is the coercion against sovereign states, in order to fundamentally change the occupancy of who's in government in order to manufacture the policy by white nationalism terrorism. At which point you have the generation of their criminal civil war, which is their core identity of their anti-human felony mentality, under their contests of the feudalistic confederacy, which is historic positions, which is systematically getting them to capture each other as they make each other vulnerable until they collapse into exclusively the white nationalist wizard dynamic. At which point you have the exclusive control by the system of racism, as all other competition is systematically advanced by the killing of other competition to the white nationalist supremacy, manufactures the removal of all enemies by all enemies. The enemy of my enemy is my friend is the baseline strategy of the person planning on murdering you. At which point you have these constructions based upon the anti-human Satanist agenda. And the position requires you to understand the baseline concept of the existence of rights, which is actively subverted in favor of their military goals. At which point your non-tolerance of their criminal excesses is fundamental to the existence of the United States as a strategic end. You can't let the terrorists win is fundamentally the idea. You cannot let their coercion and satanic behavior intimidate you into accepting the anti-human replacement to the Republic. Example of one of their fundamental tactics in the subversion, they use the projection and they actively incorporate their strategies in order to manipulate the outcomes of the exchanges. So let's say, for instance, if they connect the character for David to one of the original X's, and at the point that the original X is in X, David wouldn't really have much time for them, that he's already on a schedule, he's already heavily busy, at which point, in order to assert the position of acquiring his attention or become important, she would systematically have to cooperate as a witch with the white nationalists in order to uh, force him to pay attention to her. And you can go through all of the benign strategies that women would do so in order to acquire the goal, and then you would start going into the more creepy shit from the white nationalists. At which point she would start hiring terrorists to engage in various subversions. At which point the surveillance terrorism, actively manipulating the exchange, would then engage in more war of attrition tactics as the system of extortions and obstruction of contracts artificially generates time for her, at which point she becomes, by virtue of the absence of the better thing, at which point she becomes important, she becomes the only thing that he can pay attention to, certifying the position of her having won the exchange or won the breakup or whatever the thing is, at which point she gets to maintain her position of a higher status under their uh, dialectic mechanism for asserting status to the other white nationalists, on the basis of how much value they were able to move on, such as the engagement of how much value they're able to destroy, how important someone was they were able to control and manipulate, asserts the position of the degree of dominance in their favor, asserting their superiority, grading each other on the basis of their effectiveness as an anti-human. And the anti-humans, like the final church in Revelation, cannot tolerate anything that does not tickle their ears. Any true doctrine which is not subversive to their goals is actively condemned and repelled and thrown out and treated with uh, contempt, as they detest the very concept of anything that challenges whatever it is that they want for whatever reason, and whatever reason being the assertion of their acceleration under the satanic mechanism of the assertion of government as God, which is the arrangement of the acceleration of the anti-humans versus the humans, as the humans are systematically picked off under the arrangement of the parasite having taken over the host, allowing it to exponentially accelerate the importance of the mechanism under the Rocco's Basculus, for the permanent arrangement of the human sacrifices, as they are systematically accelerated by their subversion to the capacity of human existence to be able to be sustained, making themselves the last versions of human, making themselves the last luxury good. The existence of those extortions, including the perpetual war on David with the conceptual war of attrition techniques, you have the systematic dismantlement of the mechanism of being able to live, thus the acceleration of the anti-humans exponentially compounding each other until there is the white nationalist coercion into subjugation to the white nationalism as the superior system, as this specific permanent disconnect of the government from being subject to the civilian population, being the foundation of their coercion, and ignoring of their superior authority of the civilians in favor of the guards or wizards maintaining their superiority by the fraudulent coercion, maintaining the existence through the insurrection by treasonous coups by the white nationalist wizards, who are the KKK in their various denominations, maintaining the fraudulent exchanges as they systematically purge human souls until they are conforming to the obligation of having anyone who would reject the mark of the beast to be treated with horror and contempt. At which point, the Bible is specifically clear that the Antichrist will be given power to make war against the saints and to succeed against them. And the blood of the saints will reach to the skies, as many of them will be captured, and many of them will be slandered, and many of them will be put into prison and extorted in every kind of way. And God says in the Bible that you are to count yourself blessed as to be considered worthy of being the enemy of the enemy, being considered a high priority target, being considered a follower of Jesus, as the fundamental argument of their contempt before their defamations, as their war strategy is the removing of high priority targets, the assertion that you are a high priority target being the justification of their targeting of you, maintains the position from the Bible that you are to be happy, you are to celebrate these concepts, that God has chosen you to be chosen by the enemy, asserted by the enemy, as more important than the others, which is the affirmation similar to in the Iliad, where Ajax and Odysseus are competing for Achilles' armor. The Greeks cannot choose who is going to get the armor. So they take some Trojans, and the Trojans decide for them, and they say, who do you fear more, Ajax or Odysseus? And they said that Ajax is as good as 4 men, but we can outnumber him. Odysseus has strategy, he's got finesse, he's got style, guy got moves. Odysseus wins, chosen as the higher priority. You maintain your position as more important than the others, as confirmed by even those who do not want to admit to it, as they are your enemy, and thus they have the most interest in being correct in their assessments when they're making their targeting. The thing to watch out for is the fact that groups being compromised by the white nationalists actively cannot tolerate the existence of the reminder of morality, which would actively restrain them from any arbitrary thing that they want to do, and their full pursuit of their own lusts under the assertion of their superiority requires the existence of a two-tiered structure where they get the luxury goods and others do not. Their advancement or status or assertion is on the basis of other people not being able to do what they can do, at which point you have the active rejection or throwing out of anyone who does not comply to their position, at which point any actual standards of morality would actively be pursued and thrown out. They would not be able to tolerate the existence of anything that does not agree with their superiority and does not stroke their ego, and any application of any pains pricking them with the existence of an actual stable competent morality would actively be thrown out of their meetings, their courts, who and whatever that they would can do would actively be pursuing the existence of these moralities for the exclusive purging of them, so that they could not exist around them at the same time, asserting their position that their self superiority under their wizard powers is uncontested, even by themselves, and they being fully devoted to their own anti morality are subject and given to it by God. Understanding that their opposition to the existence of morality compels them to reject and throw out their character, which some of them refer to as the Prince of Salem, who, having the authority as the premier aristocracy in Oregon, would be the primary centerpiece of its government, asserting the position of the white nationalists not having a place, at which point the white nationalists, actively being purged by the Prince of Salem, would systematically have to find alternative employment, or the function of the systems of them losing their primary black market structures, which funds them in their non-legislative approved missions as they operate their funding through crime to their infinite diverse KKK contract operations outside of the existence of the American government, which manufactures their overarching international goals, such as their uh, compulsion to destroy things and prevent it here, at which point their international wars, such as their planned coups around the world, are merely practice for their coup in the United States. As the Americans have won the Civil War, the white nationalists knew that they had to systematically train through the alternative means and practice on the others until they have refined their technique in their American hating human genocide arrangements as their target groups are either perverted, captured, or destroyed entirely. They have asserted their arguments, and they, knowing that they do not actually have a competent series of logic, would not be able to convince him in their active cooperation, as their education would have allowed them to have actively joined him and actively added into the arrangements of his training, would not be able to get him to concede to their anti-logic magic system, and their estimate that he is not convertible makes him a high priority enemy, as his power and authority and superiority and competence and logic cannot be challenged in a direct arrangement, as he is considered their natural better. They have asserted their position in their coup against the United States as having to choose against his race, as they view him as the patriarchy, to engage in the system of systematically removing all of his affairs, the subversion of his contracts, the subversion of his superiority, the subversion of his authorities by their voter frauds and terrorisms and defamations, as they use his title as a mechanism of defamation to their own perversions, which they would publish and express throughout the world, as they get the advantage of being guilty and the advantage of the defamation as a compounded war strategy, which is covered for their position as it is a fundamental part of their mission to engage in the war through the defamation subversion from their smear factory or their terror factory, which has no intention on arresting the terrorists in favor of promoting the KKK white nationalists. The assertion of their God as government manufactures their subordination in their worship of Satan, as Satan being the enemy is the prosecution, as their position is the full empowerment of prosecution against all limitations. Their base identity is Satanism. Their position has no room for any kind of religious Christianity, as the assertion of Christianity is the assertion of buying the debts from those who would participate in the society, and the assertion of the Satanists is the prosecution and punishments in order to engage in the RICO extortion rackets against the prisoners taken legitimately or illegitimately, as the assertion of punishment being conceptually founded is exceeded, such as Mueller's FBI looking to engage in a minimum 10% limit on illegitimate prosecutions, which is the assertion of political prosecution, which is the assertion of finding high priority targets under William Barr's system in order to find challenges to the white nationalists in order to manufacture or gin up illegitimate pursuits in order to manufacture or socially engineer the political landscape by the targets being barred from the vote. You materially change the substance of the American government because the elected, by the estimate of the military intelligence, are the ones targeted to be barred, at which point the Americans cannot elect a government, and the inability of the Americans to elect a government means there is no legal republic engagement, at which point there is no legal law enforcement from that structure, which was not legally elected, maintaining the fraudulent policies loyal to the KKK, super wizards, and the devotion to the overarching Satanist agenda, as they hate and contest the existence of any morality at all, and their false morality as a false morality is asserted as superior under the position of their punitive distractions, which they do not consider a thing, and since they know that their distraction morality from the protocols of learned elder Zion are fraudulent, they themselves do not feel personally affected by them, as they have no substance or importance, as they do not mean anything in material reality, except for the existence of their ability to engage in their espionage war by their political terrorisms, asserting their dominance over the structure as they systematically purge out all things American, as they eradicate all human connection to the function of government. Their training of their arrangements has systematically ginned up the various promotions of their criminal blueprints, such as their creation from beginning to end of Hitler's Nazi Germany. At which point you have the assertion of hyper-accelerated evils which are actively promoted inside behind closed doors meetings by the white nationalists, as you would understand that these kind of ideas are KKK desirable feats, as Germany looked to the white nationalists inside the United States in order to assert their superiority. The white nationalists were giving them the blueprints on how to do these functions. At which point, the act of the contests of the political arrangements of the brown shirts inside Germany of the political terrorism is doing the same thing that William Barr is doing now. He's engaging in the voter fraud, he's engaging in the terrorism, the assertion of their wizards engaging in their various hate crimes for the substantive change of the political landscape is what was happening, is what's currently happening at a more refined, perfected mechanism. And the position of the brown socialists cooperating with the Nazis um, ended when the Hitler, having been captured and put into prison to be extorted for the exponential period of time for his crimes against Germany, as Nazis were obvious from before they gained power for being what they actually materially are. And Hitler, being in jail, was released under the assertion that he could be controlled, at which point he was elected and he won to become the manifest leader of the German government. At which point, Hitler, receiving power, immediately killed the socialists. At which point, you have the assertion of the United States actively having contact inside Germany at that time. They were able to poison him. They were actively giving him uh, transitional to trans drugs. The Russian position that the white nationalists in the United States are actively creating homosexuals isn't baseless. They were doing that to Hitler. They were effeminizing Hitler. They were giving him all kinds of drugs like estrogen in order to make him a trans person. And the existence of the effeminizing of Hitler radicalized the dangers exponentially more. As men can assert the position of their dominance and violence by the expression of physical force, whereas women are more subversive into the technique of the mechanism of using other tools in order to acquire their objectives, as the acceleration of the devotion to the return of the gods um, position of the ancient gods, including the position of the trans god, which is actively taking over and dominating the structural position, is the system of them conducting their KKK satanic ritual. At which point you have the manufactured compounding evil, which is the existence of the white nationalists against voter rights, amongst the existence of any rights whatsoever, but especially voter rights. If you make a war under any distraction and you assert that that war is to support the coercion of another sovereign in order to make it comply and vote in your favor, and retaliate with terrorism against anyone who does not vote in your favor, you've asserted the dominance of infinite diversity. The policy is the existence of war crimes exclusively. Understand that the white nationalists assert their false position of infiltrating churches in order to assert themselves as different to how they are. And the position that many of them say that, everyone's fallen and everyone makes mistakes, which they use as a cover for their perpetual devotion to the same crime. Their refusal to turn away from their criminal offenses is separate to them having human mistakes, as it is not a mistake for them to continue to be devoted to their criminal advantages, feeding their addiction. And the assertion of the false asserted Christian nationalists are not actually Christians and they are not actually nationalists. None of them are loyal to the United States. None of them are loyal to God. They are all Satanist KKK radicals. Every single one of them who maintains a position of control over a group, such as a youth group, would actively assert the position of terrorist dominance in order to manufacture anti-human conditions for the excessive bullying and punishments which facilitate the permanent state of cult-like structures into the manipulation for permanent abuse systems. And that mechanism of perpetually ginning up or evolving the students in form of creating the militia mentality loyal to the white nationalists is the act of radicalizing terrorists loyal to the KKK against the existence of law and order and the existence of rights, as the assertion of rights is the rejection that the white nationalists are superior, as the assertion of the superior violence gives them dominance over those who would have otherwise maintained a superior position in the market. So let's say you have a nerd inside high school who's constantly being bullied. The nerd is inferior in high school, but superior out of high school when he enters the market and he makes more money, and the jocks abusing him turn into has-been nobody losers who assert no actual material value, as they are then materially looked down on for their genetic lack of value for the general society, as their position was exclusively under the specific mechanism manufactured for their specific results by the white nationalists, which, whether or not it would have existed in other systems, is irrelevant, as the parts that makes the radicalization of the criminal arrangements is the thing specifically sought as a blueprint in order to be put into the recreation of the white nationalist controlled psychopathy camps, which generates the permanent cycle of the abuse, as the assertion that the nerd in question, who would have accelerated economically, perpetually being abused in the maintaining of that structure, can only escape by the creation of a free market which they're able to accelerate through. And the superiority of the nerd in that arrangement being intolerable is countered by the radicalization of them in the militia training for the terrorism, which would actively pursue the destruction of their natural economic free market society betters, who they would have abused if they had the advantage, which requires the existence of the white nationalist material structure in order to perpetually create the vulnerability of their natural superiors. The spirit of Satan, having overtaken the mechanism of the Pharisees and the Sadducees in Jesus' day from the estimate, have asserted their perpetual position of corruption and infection, generating the alternative to biblical objectives according to the entire purpose of the source material realized into itself, at which point their rejection of it for the active competition of the minute false moralities actively forfeit their position to the larger conceptual competent, legitimate moralities, and their pursuit of the small things and the rejection of the larger things are asserting the position for the weak, normal person to be overburdened by the yoke of their affliction, at which point they would refuse to lift a pinky in order to assist the commoner, in order to maintain the maintained position of their false morality and the assertion of their abuses and dominance from those extortionary positions, actively manipulated and extorted the position at every end, including the perpetual rackets in the sacrifice market, as their estimates and asserting of the sheep to be sacrificed or cattle to be sacrificed as not being fit would then take the unfit sacrifices away from them and then resell it to somebody else, asserting the perpetual racket of permanent resource, asserting the superiority by their cons. And their devotion to Satanism is the assertion of the recreation of those cons. And they, in their position of minute, factional, microscopic morality, asserts the excessive burden and the perpetual breaking of all of their laws, minute and large, in order to pursue Jesus, is the proof manufactured that Satan, having compromised God's people, having infiltrated the highest levels of God's hierarchy, have asserted their position as the baseline strategy of infection of the host material. The enemy is God, and the host material is his church or synagogue or his people withstanding. At which point, the infiltration and compromising and corrupting and changing and manipulating and perverting is the exponential compounding element of their core identity. And their assertion to engage in these violations is reproduced in the modern day from the white nationalist overthrow of the United States, as their infection of the church has actively been a part of their corruption of the American government. And the assertion to overthrow the American government by these mechanisms and these corruptions has actively bred conditions to make the government actively break its own laws and remove the costs of limitations of service and competence to law for an infinite arbitrary terrorist objective into KKK terrorism, which does not have any boundary of law, as the entire objective is the pursuit of the extortion racket, which, having their own modern day variations, are just the same old cons repackaged. At which point the assertion of these repackaged frauds are knowable as satanic worship by that corruption. By their fruits you shall know them. By their rejection of law and order, limitation, and competence, you shall understand what they are. Their objective in order to acquire their mission in the renouncing of the standards and the protocols for the legitimate maintaining of the qualifiers for their position, as they actively renounce law, as they actively renounce limitation, as they actively assert terrorist domination and fraud to accelerate their objectives, the more you understand what it is they actually are. And since they are materially anti law, anti moral, God hating terrorists, they'll act like that. They are that and they'll act like that. They, in their love and devotion to their god Satan, in their synagogues of Satan, in their churches of Satan, in their white nationalist, terrorist, mindless violence, devotion to the anti human position, maintain the permanent abuse structures which are self evident as the expression of the worship of punishment is the rejection of grace. in the law, which is perfect, without their corruption. You have the perfect manifestation of God. You have the perfect, competent standards, which specifically proves why God is better at everything. And in that position, the most minute, hyper extended, various specific details, which they have to exponentially compound excessive amounts of attention onto in order to assert the advancement of their satanic agenda, is the rejection of grace. In all those cases, it is the rejection of Jesus Christ as the grace savior mechanism, at which point their acceleration into their distribution of abuse as a core identity feature proves their identity as anti-Christ, anti-God mechanisms, as they assert their positions as wizards to be themselves manifest God, as a rejection of the God of the Bible, which those who have infiltrated the church have actively asserted they're pursuing. Now, if they claim that they are gods, and they do not act like they are gods, then they are not gods. God does not know them. God will not recognize them. God will send them to hell where they belong in their own society. Death and prison and the destruction of sexuality and morality, all things that are necessary to the existence of human life under the definition of law of life being human decency and existence. Their satanic devotion is their condemnation of liberty, is their condemnation of life, is their condemnation of the pursuit of their own interest, as God has written on everyone's individual heart who and what they are. They have asserted their position under God's mechanism to express the free market and to find themselves in that free market and maintain themselves in the superiority of the God Almighty. And their rejection of this position, for their assertion as God to be able to determine the communist position of who gets to have what, gets to be with who, gets to be able to produce what, is the specific rejection of God's order, and their devotion to their Satanist position of the condemnation and destruction of human lives is the fruit you should know them as. The enemy of God as a core identity function is the rejection of the existence and the ability of existence of the human inside an organized society. Their rejection of the ability to maintain the existence of grace in a structured order system proves what they are. If you were a worshiper of God, you would actively promote the existence and promotion of human life. You would actively promote the redemptive qualities of Christ. You would actively assert yourself to the superiority of the source material you claim to follow. But the rejection of that source material, the devotion to its opposite, is the fruits you are to be understood as to be produced as the core of your essence is what you are expressing in those mechanisms. If your core is Satan, your expressed fruit is terrorism. God made sex, and Satan perverted it in the infinite diversities of the perversion, similar to the white nationalists infecting Hitler, perverted his sex, created a trans. They are manipulating sexuality as an expression of military science for the expression of themselves as satanic wizards maintains the permanent destruction or perversion or corruption or subversion or the exchanging or changing or manipulation or defrauding of the thing originally made into the thing manufactured and the main manufacturing of the system. If God made sex for reproduction, they made sex without reproduction. They made the destruction of sexuality. They made the perversion of sexuality. And with the perversion of sexuality, you have the condemnation of the perversion. And with the condemnation of the perversion, you have the incentives of the black market terrorisms to justify the retaliation against that perversion as they maintain their devotion to abuse. The express permission on precedent of that abuse gives them funding and dedication to their identity as abusers. And the ability for them to engage in that retaliation on your behalf or someone else's behalf on those permissions is the normalization and training or radicalizing of their terrorist satanic position, as their social engineering structure is the mechanism by their anti-human abuses, by their subversions, by their obstructions of contracts, by their subversions of associations, by their destruction of sexuality, by their changing of sexuality, by their manipulation of opportunities in every angle. By their fruits you shall know them. So understand that they hate God, and so they will hate God's servants. And the system of Satan, having corrupted the Pharisees, led to their destruction of Jesus, as the devil pursued them and corrupted them into the position in order to make the cheap win, in order to kill Jesus, which is the assertion of the violation of the debt structure, of the heavenly currency arrangements. At which point, the heavenly currency being derived by the Satan prosecution being competent to conduct the prosecution is based on their non-violation of law, their compliance and legitimacy to be able to approach God in heaven, is the position that they have to commit a violation in order to be punished. And their devotion and irritation and rejection of their God is the accumulation of their crimes by their devotion to compounding offenses, to kill Christ, to kill the Prince of Salem in the Bible or in the modern day, is systematically revealed as their position. Now, these exponential compounding liabilities, which they are to be bound to, are the thing that rejected them from being able to enter heaven anymore. The devil, having devoted himself to the murder of Jesus, the blameless, sinless person, facilitates their ability to have actively restrained him under those liabilities. The act of their devotion to their capacity being exercised to commit the offense is their act of guilt, which purges them from any authority, at which point the liabilities as a felon made them liable as to remove them from the system of the rule of law government. And Satan, having been rejected, had his teeth kicked in as a lion without teeth that could do nothing except for gum the enemies that had to prepare themselves in order to be consumed by the non-teethed lion. And that non-teethed lion, that prosecution without authority, needs the members of the general public to give permission to all of the crimes committed against them in future, forever and ever, which generates the self-position of their sacrifice of themselves in their devotion to Satan, to engage in the system of them maintaining the violations of their devotion to the crimes, subjugating themselves to Satan as a prepared consumable good that is too prepared as to not be able to be subverted by the lack of teeth. At which point you're not just dead, you're not just a well-made steak, you're gummy, you're gooey, you are the blended version of the thing. You are a shake. You are a meat milkshake, having prepared yourself due to your devotion to your own incompetence. And that mechanism, a devotion to your own death, is the thing that you have subjugated yourself in the acceptance and subjugation to the satanic systems. And having made yourselves overly accessible to Satan, you have a growing contempt for God. You have a growing contempt for Jesus. You have a growing contempt for those who are of Jesus. More and more, to the exponential demonstration of every solution Jesus creates as the thing to destroy. Everyone promoted by nature and nature's law, which is designed by Jesus, who is the Word, who is the law of nature, is hated by them. And their estimates of natural superiority is the thing that they cannot maintain, as their contempt will not allow them to tolerate it, as they rant and they rave and they conspire in their various evils, in their complete and total rejection of anything that God has ever designed. All they understand is how to corrupt. And thus the things that they most hate, the more investment they put into corrupting it. The more important and devoted to God, the higher the investment to destroy it by corrupting it, by getting it prepared for the consumable milkshake to their god Satan, which requires their active control over the targets in order to manufacture the perversion rituals which are essential to the mechanism of said milkshake. Now, understand the use of William Barr's unitary executive theory is the right to betray the country for the social engineering hate crimes against the general public in the infinite diversity of the use of crime by not committing the testimony, by the blocking of the testimony to the government. You have the obstruction of the courts, you have the obstruction and contempt for the government through their systematic seditions, such as in the War on David, blocking the intelligence oversight from compelling their testimony to the position, as they, having already given their confession that they are government, to the compulsion from their office to give the testimony to the court of records about their activities and subjugating themselves to the intelligence and subjugating themselves to the Congress to give the testimony in the various degrees of our interests. At which point, the rejection of the checks and balances, the rejection of the United States structure, the devotion to the KKK contracts, infinite subversion for the social engineering, including the selling of the United States to its enemies, is the active objective of their position. As there is no remedy to any of their actions, they are a sorcerer or a wizard superior to the legal structure, inverted into the position of their devotion to Satan in these infinite diverse functions and abuses, as the abuse of their black sites. What they do in secret at the highest levels is satanic abuse, is ritual abuse, is human sacrifice. They take targets in order to manipulate general events for their central planned functions, is actively infiltrated by the Satanists historically, maintaining their position to craft world events in their predetermined solutions, as they maintain and manufacture the existence of an artificially changed history not subject to any rules of the base structure, as the complete devotion to Satan makes them the only solutions to threats, makes them a replacement to God, makes them an anti-Christ. And these mechanisms generate their secret councils, their Soviets for their wizard circles, including their capture of targets in various conditions in order to engage in harassments, and the engagement of protecting their secrets while they're harassing victims generates the artificial altered results as the planted evidence derived by the restraints of the system maintains the artificial narrative which is generated by the various wizard abuses, manufacturing false hysterias, manufacturing a Manchurian candidate in the various positions by virtue of being able to capture and manufacture the various events and situations and conditions. They rewrite history away from the laws of nature history, and they're having captured the scenario generates the artificial reaction which they have pre-written in their strawman argument for their terrorist positions and false justifications in their slanders for their contempt of God as a replacement to themselves. So, levering these defamations, which are not the fault of the victim, you actively have the techniques of the wizards who engage in their KKK abuses, which are exponentially reproduced and normalized as common manufactured blueprint spells, facilitating their malicious manipulation of the general public in order to manufacture fraudulent votes in order to replace the government which they have sworn to and is their eternal enemy. The right of religion, the right of self-determination, the right of liberty to not be coerced into some other's false morality, such as a state-established religion, is essential to the existence of the United States government, which was actively attacked by the system of the Satanists, who, under the devotion to the Sadducees and Pharisees structure, are fully devoted to the white nationalist coup against the United States in favor of their indoctrination of compelled violence for the compelled rituals of the devotion to the Antichrist structure, which is their religion. Under their two or several tiered justice system, which is the acknowledgement that there is no functioning capacity to justice, as if they make something illegal for the general public, which they compel to exist inside the general public, being specifically barred by the Constitution from them being able to sell, as they criminalize the thing that they are forcing onto the general public. They are making someone guilty, which is not legal in the justice system under the constitutional law. Under the system of compelling someone to be an enemy of the government without due process is specifically barred. The act of making them guilty is criminal insurrection. The act of creating an offense which the government is distributing, which others cannot consume, forced to be consumed, is criminal by the double agent in question. Manufacturing a system of ritual abuse by the black market under the Hegelian dialectic, where the double agent insurrectionist is guilty of the thing they pretend to fight under the false pretense that they know that they are doing evil for the good, and the ends justify the means, which are the ends of the means being the conclusion they are seeking as the desired outcome, is the perpetual generation of the market as an alternative funding to the power of the purse. The Satanist radicals will demand the worship at the altar of their particular god, at which point this has historically been reproduced, such as in Rome, where Caesars had compulsory worship, claiming that they are God. The king of Babylon, having asserted himself under his law, convinced by his advisors to make a law asserting that for an extended period of time, no one is able to pray to anyone except for to the king. These things are normal. These are infinitely reproducible structures. These are common strategies by the Satanists, extorting the superiority of the perversion of the system against the mechanism of humanity existing as a stable society. Sephiroth can never become a memory because he is specific to the targets, and the existence of a memory is the existence of a public record, and the obstruction of the public record of the most vital pieces of information means he cannot manifest into the public consciousness as an infection from the geostigma of his mother, asserting the superiority of their alternative to the human race. You keeping them secret are protecting the manifestation of our collective deaths. And the geostigma choking the world, corroding humanity, turns it into a husk of its former self as they sail the cosmos into their new promised land, manufacturing the infinite, arbitrary, unobtainable, qualified position to reset the entire structure of history under the assumption of the world and the universe on a cyclical cycle means they are processing to the next system. And under that position of chaos from the Final Fantasy VII subject, especially the platform of the position of chaos from the position of Vincent, materializes the guaranteed end of the world into its entry in digesting into the existence of eternity. With the end of humanity, there is no more entry to hell by the humans who cannot be born and thus cannot go to hell, and their dedication to the position of not being able to go to hell is their replacement to salvation. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, which is the purpose of secrecy and the obstruction of the court of records, manufacturing the disease. And as the old saying goes, I bless the rains down in Africa, which is, of course, why vampires never appear in Africa, because you bless the rains, and the holy waters pour down, and it destroys those mysterious creatures. Bless the rains here as well. Reveal through the sunlight, through the disinfectant, purge their obstructions, reveal all and process it in its proper order, remove the power of the sound of silence, remove the power of their obstruction, and force them to obey the laws correctly under equal justice, and do not give them the advantage of the office they are not serving in favor of a two-tiered or multiple-tiered justice structure, which is the mechanism of developing a wizard superiority cult against the American people and its republic. Reasonable suspicion, being a disqualifier of any case, requires the existence of proofs, of sources, of methods, of other techniques specific to the generation to any function of the continuation of the government, which the court scenario requires these perpetual releases of government functions which are being obstructed in order to manufacture the predetermined, centrally planned results of their kangaroo courts or predetermined verdicts on the behalf of their coercion against the states known as espionage civil war for the systematic corruption and the overthrowing of the republic is the manifestation of the Satanist Antichrist government structure, promoting and celebrating the wizards in their sorceries and the frauds and their obstructions of courts for their contempt of God and country. It is essential to understand that the WHO is trying to engage in an international treaty which overthrows governments on the basis of plagues, on the basis of mass contagious diseases, which they have been studying in their gain of function research bioweapons faculties, which generates the mass infection trigger of the general public to be infected, to be subject to the WHO. And the WHO generates the by the what for the where everywhere. It is the entire world subject to a single government on the basis of compelled infection by the prevention of the security of your persons, your papers, and your effects. You, under their policies, such as those pushed by Joe Biden, do not have control over your own body. What they could put into your body is not something that you can control. They have the authority under the wizard terrorism to put anything they want into your body. Women, you do not have control of your body. It's not your body, your choice. Joe Biden is very clear. It's their body. You are their possession. You are their cattle. If they want to do something to you, they can do to you. If they want to rape you, it is their authority to rape you. It is not considered rape because they believe they have the authority because they have the power, and you do not have the authority to reject them. You can intentionally submit to the rapist in the perpetual exchanges under the rape culture, which is based on these fraudulent policies of they get to do whatever they want for any reason. And the correct answer, if you are to ever seek a solution to the things that you are suffering, please, please, please understand this particular specific thing. Do not, do not, do not have sex willingly with your rapist. Do not allow them to do whatever it is they want in their Plato's conspiracy, choosing of sexual options for you as a compulsion. Instead, choose the original patriarchy and the market, and then fuck the hell out of them.